I'm really privileged to have Dan with us tonight. Um, I've known Dan a long time. I don't know if you remember, I was in one of your classes back in it was at 1837, I think. It's, quite quite a while ago. Anyway, I've known Dan quite a while, and it's been a lot of fun to be with him and see how he has progressed in a sense, because he was always teaching with Herb Wisner, and so to see him kind of grow into this role of he's written books. He's written two books. He's done newspaper articles for the Register Guard back when that was a regular newspaper. And he and his wife, Barbara, have started the Wild Birds Unlimited stores. There's the one on Willamette and one in the north. And so a lot of things have changed, including Dan in his new chair here. So a lot of things have changed, but one thing that hasn't changed is Dan's ability to really explain things. And I was able to hear Dan give this particular talk at Boggs, I don't know, quite a few months ago. And I was just enthralled with his ability. I shouldn't say so much, I'm putting you on the spot, but it was really good. So you're really in for a treat tonight to learn about bird feathers and the colors and how that all works from a real master educator. So Dan, take over.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to come speak again. Let me make one request, if I may. For anybody who comes up and wants to talk to me afterwards, would you please introduce yourself to me? My eyes are such that I can't see who you are even when you're standing 2 feet in front of me. I beat leukemia, it's gone, but it took away my eyesight and it took away my balance, hence I'm sitting here tonight or I'd be on the floor soon. So if you'd tell me who you are, that would be very helpful to me. Thank you. So tonight, I want to talk about iridescence. And it's more than just birds, and we think of it as a visual thing, and it is, but I'm going to show you how it's more than just vision. So the word comes from the Greek goddess Iris, who brought messages from the gods to the mortals and to other gods, and she traveled on the rainbow to do that. So we get Iris and iridescence. So how is iridescence different from just plain color? They're related. I'll talk about both and how they are interrelated with each other. Leslie bunting is a beautiful blue bird, but it's not iridescent. The peacock is. What's the difference between those? Well, we'll look at that later. But I'll start with color in birds with the blue. Now, I'm not going to do a detailed talk about color in birds. That's another whole hour presentation that I do. But there's some simple things that we need to understand about birds in order to understand what iridescence is and the role it plays. So here we have a Leslie bunting mountain bluebird, a scrub jay, and a Steller's jay. All nice blue birds, right? Well, I'm going to tell you that absolutely none of those birds are blue. They're all gray. They have the melanin pigment in the feathers. We make melanin, animals make melanin, and it produces blacks, browns, grays, but not blue. Blue, there is no blue pigment in any bird anywhere in the world. It does not exist. In fact, it's so rare that only a handful of animals have a true blue pigment. There's a couple of butterflies in South America that have some blue in the wing that's pigment. And there are a couple of species of fish that have blue. And there's a blue sea star in the Great Barrier Reef in the tropical Pacific. And that's just about it. Blue does not exist otherwise in nature with animals. So how is it that this looks blue to you? Well, in order to understand that and then go on and understand iridescence, we need to look at just some basics. As you know, light is a wave. we talk about wavelength, and we talk about that as wavelength is in nanometers. Now, that's not a term we use every day. So what is a nanometer? It's a billionth of a meter or a millionth of a millimeter, a more unit you're more familiar with. The naked eye, you can see down to about a tenth of a millimeter. So when we're talking wavelengths of light, we're talking way, way smaller than that. So the wavelength is measured between, on a wave, the peak from one wave to the next peak. And in red light, then you're looking at 650 to 700 nanometers. In blue light, you're looking 400 to 450 nanometers. It's a shorter wavelength, a little higher energy. So that's it for the visible spectrum. We see only a tiny part of the visible spectrum. I mean, we see the visible spectrum, that's only a tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So if you get below blue, you get to the ultraviolet, which when you get to real ultraviolet, we can't see. You can continue on down to 300 nanometers, and then you're in the area of X-rays. You go up the other direction, you get red to infrared, and there are some animals that can detect infrared. But continue that clear on up to microwaves that are a meter to millimeter to a millimeter to a meter. I will get it yet. So if we take all the colors that we can see from 400 to roughly 700 nanometers, and we combine all of those, you get white light, which is what we see, of course, all the time. And you can break that up again, as happens in a rainbow, or you can separate the colors in a prism, but they're all there. So if we look at this lesser goldfinch, it's yellow because it has a pigment in it. Now, I said there's no blue pigment, but here there's a pigment, and it's dissolved all through the keratin of the feathers. So what comes back to you is yellow light. Now, you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit here, because I can't depict something this small. So the keratin, that yellow, is spread all through the feather. And what I've done here, consider I've taken out one feather and I've taken one barb of that feather off and done a cross section. So it's all yellow. Those black spots are the melanin, is a pigment that we produce. They're not round. I just can't make them the shape they are. They're very irregular in shape and size, and they're all in discrete units, not dissolved all through the feather like the yellow is. So white light comes through, it hits one of those melanin granules, and it absorbs all the light. So it looks black. Nothing comes back to you. The light that hits the part with the keratin, or the keratin with the pigment in it, that's a yellow pigment. It throws back yellow light to you. In reddish colored birds, same thing, but it's red that comes back to you. So that's pigmented. What about this bird? The crow, other blackbirds. There's the melanin granules that would reflect back, or absorb the light, so there's nothing reflected back. And there's no pigment in the keratin, so the bird looks black. Now, use your imagination a little bit more and imagine that embedded in that keratin are little air bubbles, tiny air bubbles. Remember, I talked about wavelengths in terms of nanometers. These bubbles are about 400 to 430 nanometers. Very, very small air bubbles. And that interferes with blue light such that the grays come from the melanin and some diffusion in the pigment of the light. So now if we look at this, and we look at the blue light, so as I said, that's in 400 and some nanometers. It turns out that that size air bubble interferes with the blue light, and the result is you get blue. So this J looks blue, and it looks blue no matter how you look at it because it's being scattered in all directions. So anywhere you look at it, you're getting a look at that blue light that's reflected back. But that's not iridescence. We need to go a step further to look at that. So blue is a structural color. Now, imagine that all these little white dots are those tiny air bubbles. So when light passes through, the longer wavelengths like red just pass right by those bubbles. Green's a little shorter wavelength, but it passes right by them. But those bubbles are the same size as the blue light, and it interferes with that light. And as a result, it reflects that back. And it's again in all directions. Now, I'll tell you that violet is the same thing. It's small, and it's reflected back. The problem is that we don't see violet very well. It's right in the end of what we can perceive. Most violet, what little bit of violet we can see, is overwhelmed by the blue. So you see blue, you don't see violet, but it's there. So that J that's really gray looks blue. So it's a structural color. It's not a pigment. And that's going to be of every bluebird in the world. And the differences in color, so a little darker for the western bluebird versus the jay, just has to do whether it's reflecting back wavelengths of light that are 430 nanometers or 450 nanometers. Not a big difference, but it's enough that we see it as a different color. Why is the sky blue? There's no pigment floating around in the sky. There are, however, molecules of oxygen and nitrogen that do the same thing. They reflect back blue light. So you see a blue sky, again, no pigment. Now I took a feather out of a Steller's jay. It was a study skin. I didn't take a live bird. But I plucked a feather out of that study skin of the breast. So it's a nice blue looking feather. Put it under a microscope. And as you know, a microscope, the light is below, projects up through and into your eye. Now, if I had taken a yellow feather, what you would see is yellow. But in a blue feather, what you see is the light that's transmitted through that feather. It looks like this. Now, I turned off that light below, and I put a light up above that reflects back. Now I'm looking, instead of transmitted light, I'm looking at reflected light. I'm not doing anything to the feather. It looks like that. Now, you can do the same thing yourself. If you find a jay feather out there in the wild, pick it up, you hold it down, look down on it, and it's going to reflect back blue light. Just so the jay looks blue to you, even though there's no pigment. But what gets transmitted, because there's no pigment to absorb it, will just look gray. So take that feather, look at it, it looks blue. Now hold it up to the sun, and the blue will just totally disappear. So that's a structural color. What about iridescence? So iridescence is, we think of as a visual signal, but it isn't necessarily. Lots of things are iridescent. These opals are certainly very iridescent. And soap bubbles are very iridescent. And this is looks like a wild abstract painting. It's actually a colored pencil painting I did several years ago when I could see. And it's not just an abstract. This is actually based on a photo I took very close up of the surface of a soap bubble. So all of these areas are interference patterns that show. So now I take one piece of that soap bubble. Looks like a thick line here, but you know, soap bubbles are very thin, but they have a thickness to them. So the light that's coming off of that, some of that passes through, but some reflects back on the surface. Some reflects off the inner surface of that soap bubble. And where those two different groups of wavelengths converge, they cause interference, and the color you see depends on the angle you look at it, with different colors from different angles. That's That's iridescence. Look at it more. So the wavelengths, I'm just using blue and red, but it's any wavelength of light. So if we take the red light and we have all those waves of red light, if they're all the same, but they're a little bit out of phase. So if we have where the trough of one wave is exactly where the peak of another wave is, that cancels the light. So those black areas is where the light it has been canceled out. But other colors are there in the other part of it, and they will change as those angles of interference change. So in this case, we look at these waves, they're all the same, but if we make it so the peak and the trough don't exactly intersect, where they do peak, it can cause different things can happen with that interference of those waves. It can intensify the color of the wavelength you're looking at. Or if you look at one wavelength and a second wavelength that's slightly different, where they interact with each other, it can actually produce a whole nother color altogether. So you see on that soap bubble, it's liquid and it's moving around. So all those color streaks change as the relationship of the wavelengths to each other change. So with animals, here's a lizard in Africa, very bright, and it's iridescent. So like the soap bubble has an outer and an inner surface to that thin edge of the bubble. This is just a bigger version of that. You have scales, they're flat. So the flat scale reflects back blue light, a structural blue, there is no blue pigment. And because it's overlapping another one, that's sort of like the inner and outer layer of the bubble, two flat surfaces reflecting back the same light, they interfere with each other and you get the iridescence. Now the female lacks that. She's on the right here. And the male doesn't look very colorful here. But if you changed your position, stood up or sat down, whatever needed, it would suddenly change back to a bright iridescent blue again. Now mammals, you find iridescence throughout the nature, but mammals, for a long time we thought, well, mammals just don't have iridescence, except one that we knew of. There's a mole in South Africa called the golden mole, and it's iridescent. It's greenish, dark iridescence. It's not bright, brilliant iridescence, but it is iridescent. It does shimmer a little bit if you look closely at it. Now, if iridescence is a visual thing, how does that help this mole? It's spending its whole life underground and it's blind. So what good is iridescence? Well, it turns out if you were to examine the hairs on that mole, they're not round like most mammal hair is. They're flat. And one flat hair overlapping another flat hair causes interference. And then something brand new. This was unknown until just 6 months ago when a paper was published where a researcher in Belgium was looking through study skins of mammals in a museum. And one of them caught her attention. She noticed it was looking a little bit shimmery. So they looked closer at those and the other specimens in the museum, and they found 12 mammals that were slightly iridescent, like that golden mole. And it turns out that almost all of them were shrews. There were a couple that were not, but the shrews, they live in or near water, spend a lot of time in water. This is the water shrew that's found throughout most of North America. And I'm putting it here because it has the same characteristics as what she found in the museum. This little animal's great. It's on the surface of the water. It walks on the water, literally. It's walking on the water. It's feeding on aquatic insects, and it dives under and uses its feet to propel itself down. When it stops paddling, it just floats right back up to the surface. Because those hairs are so tightly packed together. Now, nobody's done the experiment, so I don't know if this is true. But the characteristics of this mole and its habitats are identical to the kind of habitat she found in the specimens in Belgium that were iridescent. Now, we'd have to examine this mole to find out. Nobody's done that. But is it possible that this shrew is also iridescent? Be fun to find out. This is a blue morpho butterfly in tropical South America, and it certainly is iridescent. How does that help it? It lives in this dense jungle, but they're found in large flocks. So as they flap those wings, there's sort of a flashing of iridescence that's going on. Not only the iridescence, but the blue itself is flashing back. And I've read reports of pilots flying over the jungle and seeing flashing blue down below them. That's flocks of these butterflies. So how does that help? Well, when you have a whole lot of them, they're shimmery and iridescent and flashing on and off because they're flapping their wings, it makes it really hard for a predator to single out one. So it's a way of distracting the predator. When they sit, well, our butterflies are basically not iridescent, most of them. And when this one sits like other butterflies, it folds its wings over its back, and it suddenly becomes very camouflaged. The underwing makes camouflage, difficult to see. But the top wing is the iridescence. And that shimmery iridescence of lots of them together gives them that, helps them hide. And that comes about because its scales are blue. Now, this again, no pigment. This is a structural blue, like the jay. And it's a flat surface, and it's reflecting back blue light only in one direction. It's not scattered all over. And the scale beneath it is the same thing. So you have overlapping flat surfaces reflecting just a tiny fraction of waves. Now you get iridescence. So where those two different wavelengths coming at slight different angles interfere with each other, you get iridescence. And as a result, the butterfly doesn't change color. It changes when you look at it. The jay's uniform, no matter where you look at it. The butterfly changes depending on where you're looking at it, but it changes only within that range of blue. So it gets a little brighter, a little dimmer. So it's flashy, shimmery. So the cat and its fur is nice and round. It doesn't reflect back light, particularly at any iridescence, but that mole with a flat fur overlapping each other, getting the iridescence. Well, iridescence in other animals. This is a guppy. Now, if you're an aquarium enthusiast, you know about guppies. They were one of the first aquarium fish to be popularized in aquariums. They're about 1 to 1.5 inches long. They're very easy to raise. If you want lots of guppies, just put a male and female together and you'll have a lot of guppies. But they're iridescent. And even the female has some iridescence. So how is that useful to this? Well, the male can use that iridescence in 2 ways. One way, he can attract the attention of females. And males are attracted to females that are iridescent as well. So a female that's iridescent, males pay more attention to than the others. And the males, that bright shimmery iridescence helps the females identify them where they're found in sort of shady waters, overhanging bush that makes the water shaded, along tropical pools and shallow streams. Now she can find him better, and the more iridescent he is his advertisement saying, look at me, I'm bright, I'm colored, I'm healthier than that one over there. So males are more associated to females that are bright, and females are more attracted to males that are bright. But now some guppies are found a little bit away. There's a population of guppies upstream that's not in the shade. They're in more open sunlight. Those are not as iridescent. And in those guppies, the black spots become more important. So the iridescence is important in the shady water, less important in the sunny water. Now, since we've had them for years, we bred guppies into all sorts of fancy tails and colors and everything that bear no relation to what would happen in nature. Other fish are iridescent. This is a little neon tetra. It's also a popular community fish. It's a nice, peaceful fish in your aquarium, and it only gets an inch and a quarter long. And it's brilliant red and the blue iridescent. Now, in this one, there's something a little different happens, that the iridescence is stronger when it's really active. When it goes to sleep at night, and they do go to sleep at night, that iridescence diminishes considerably. It also diminishes if the fish is not as healthy and if the fish is stressed. So these are fish that are found in schools, and if they're stressed, if they're kept in an aquarium with other fish that nip the fins and things like that. But also, if you were to take one of those, say, a school of 15 neon tetras, and you took one out and you put it alone in an aquarium, that blue will begin to fade because it's stressed being alone. They want to be together. And that iridescence helps keep them together. So it has another relative about the same size, peacefulness, called a cardinal tetra. Difference being that it has the red all the way across the belly. Again, they're found in sort of shaded waters. And in schooling together like this, it helps keep them together. If one strays a little bit, there's all the other shimmering over there. They find each other and stay together because of that iridescence. And there's lots of iridescent fish of other species in the tropics. Insects. Iridescence is plentiful in insects besides that butterfly. Now, this is a very colorful little insect, colorful green beetle. It's not very popular with foresters. It lives over here in the ponderosa pine and spends most of its life like this. As a wood-boring beetle, it's boring through the wood. That larva is chewing through the wood, which makes them not too popular with foresters. But woodpeckers love them. It's also not popular because this is the longest lived insect that we know of. There's one record of one of these beetles living at least 57 years. Many of them live to be 40 years with no problem. Most of that life is spent as that larva chewing through the wood. For the last few weeks or months of its life, it emerges and metamorphoses into this green shimmery beetle. So how's that help? Well, it helps it. Now it can draw attention. It's easy with that shimmering, so it can find a mate more easily. And it can also advertise that my shimmer's better than yours, so I'm healthier. Now, there are several iridescent green beetles in the world. This one is not one. This beetle is common all over the world now, thanks to being introduced by people. You probably know this beetle if you've ever fed mealworms to your fish or to reptiles or to birds. The mealworm is just strictly the larval form of that beetle. So most people know the mealworms and they don't know the adult. Well, one experiment that was done was to do it side by side with the very iridescent green jewel beetle. Now, that beetle ought to be really easy to see. It's bright, it's shimmery, it's green, no problem, right? Different predators were allowed into this experiment. And it turns out that they had no trouble grabbing the mealworm beetle every time, no problem. They missed that green beetle, frequently missed that green beetle. What was even more interesting to me was people missed the green beetle just as often as the birds did. Why? Well, it's shimmery, it's shiny. It's hard to find where it is. You grab for it, but that isn't quite where it really is because it's shiny and shimmery, like the background. So they took the wing coverings off this beetle and glued them onto the back of the mealworm beetle. So now what was the effect? Well, the mealworm beetle was always grabbed by the predator, no problem. But the mealworm beetle that had these green wing covers glued onto them were missed just as often as the green beetle was. So it is the iridescence is somehow playing a role in that, and it's a form of camouflage. It doesn't look like it, it's bright, but it is a form of camouflage. The predators have trouble finding it. And there were other experiments similar that have been done with these beetles. So this is a tiger beetle. Tiger beetles, there's lots of species all over the world. They get their name not because they look like a tiger, but because they're very, very aggressive. They eat other insects and they attack viciously on another insect. But they're iridescent. Different species have different iridescence. How does that help them? Well, the beetle was hidden from predators. This predator is now hidden from its prey. For that same reason, it's iridescent, it's shimmery. The prey doesn't see it coming as easily. So now the predator is more hidden. So water on the leaves makes this shimmery sort of iridescence, and light coming through the leaves shimmers. And that's what the beetle does, it shimmers. So it's well camouflaged in that kind of an environment. What about this lizard? This is a western fence lizard. We have them around here. Bright blue on the belly. No pigment, remember, no pigments at all. But it's iridescent blue because it reflects back that blue. And because those scales overlap one another tightly, it's iridescent. Now, the female lacks that. But the male uses that iridescence to help him. First, it's a good advertisement for the female. She can see him easily. And the healthier he is, the brighter his iridescence. So she can read his health. And then he does push-ups, basically. If you watch these lizards, you'll see them doing push-ups. He's showing off that belly, not only to her, he's saying, hey, you other guys stay away from me. This is my area. So it's advertising for a female, and it's trying to keep the other guys away. There are iridescent snakes all over the world, several iridescent pythons. And again, there's two things this iridescence accomplishes. One is like the tiger beetles. It's shimmery coming through the grass. It's hard for the prey to see it coming. So it helps disguise the predator. But those scales are such that that flattenness and that causes the iridescence is like that golden mole. The golden mole lives in sandy sort of soil, coarse sandy soil. So as it travels burrowing through that flat hair helps it get through that kind of soil much more easily than a round fir would. Snake, the same thing. It can slither through the grass a little bit easier because of those flat scales. So the result of those flat scales is iridescence. Iridescence in plants. Well, here's a peacock begonia in the tropics. Iridescent plants are found in the tropics. Why iridescence? Again, they don't see anything, so why would they be iridescent? Well, it turns out that if you grow this plant and then you take it out into the full sunlight, they grow in really shady areas. You grow it in full sunlight, it will soon lose that iridescence. It doesn't need it anymore. What's going on is in the chloroplast. Now, this is chloroplast seen in a leaf of Elodea, which is a common aquarium plant. I'm using it because it's only 2 cells thick. I don't have to look through a cuticle or anything else. You can see the chloroplast really well in there. Now, this is going to be very diagrammatic, and I'm not going into the details of all of that, but there are stacks of membranes that contain the chlorophyll called thylakoids, and they're sort of randomly through much of the chloroplast. In those iridescent plants, they become very regular and stacked on each other. As a result, they reflect back blue light, and you get iridescence where the wavelengths cross. Now, if you have one of these and you take it out into the full sunlight, it will lose that iridescence. And here you see now the blue light is being reflected back. That allows more red light to reach the chloroplast, and the red is more important for the photosynthesis. So you take this plant, let it lose its iridescence, and now you put it back into that environment next to where the blue begonia is, and you measure the rates here. It turns out that the iridescent plant is 20% more efficient at photosynthesis than the one that's lost its iridescence. So it's a benefit to the plant. Visually, plays no role. So what about in birds? Hummingbirds is obviously one example of iridescence. And if you look at it from different angles, the color is really the same that's projected out everywhere, but the angle you look at it makes a difference. A deeper red, almost black, or red. I've had people tell me they have black-chinned hummingbird. No, you had one of our regular hummingbirds, Rufus oranus, but it turned its head. And when it turned its head, it all went black because that iridescence is very, very directional. And that's important to the bird because, and you can see the quality of the red is a little different here, but that's again, just the angle you're looking at it. So this male Anna's hummingbird, that throat's very dark in this angle, but it's very directional. So he sees a female and he moves his throat back and forth to get her attention. And what that does makes a flash of very intense red light toward her. Now, somebody looking at another angle sees black. Don't pay attention. But that gets her attention because here's this flash of red light coming at her. And he's using that to attract her attention. Rufous hummingbird, same thing. With all hummingbirds, really. The male is using that as a way to attract attention to the females. Here's a different example, however. This is a fiery-throated hummingbird in Panama. I don't know if this is a male or female because it turns out they look almost identical, subtle differences. We're used to thinking of males as being bright and showy and not females. Here they both are. So he uses this as a way to get her attention, show off my health, but she uses it as well. Both of them defend a feeding territory all year long. Now, he plays no role in breeding other than to mate with a female and go off and find another one, like all hummingbirds, no pair bonding of any kind. But she has a feeding territory that she defends against other hummingbirds by her bright plumage. So both of them have separate feeding territories, and they defend it with that iridescence. Evening grosbeaks are nice and colorful, but they're yellow. That's pigment. There is no iridescence here, or in a purple finch, no iridescence. So those are pigments from carotenoids. Carotenoids are only in plants. Birds or other animals can't produce carotenoids. So the only way you can get a carotenoid is in your diet. So those different pigments are responsible for different colors in plants. And these flowers contain carotenoids. And the seeds aren't colorful, but they still contain the carotenoid. So as you're feeding the bird and it's eating these seeds, it's still picking up some of that yellow carotenoid. And that gets incorporated into growing feathers. You can't put it in a feather that's already established. It has to be when it's growing, that's the time that the pigment gets put in. So in this feather, it's all under genetic control. It depends at some point in the stage, it's saying, okay, let's grab the melon, we'll stick it in here, and let's stop putting it in there, and I'm going to take some of the carotenoid and put it in over here. So you get different things, genes being turned on and off and different colors added at different times. But again, that's only when the feather is developing. Now, in this American goldfinch, so it's eating carotenoids that are yellow, but it turns out that carotenoid is not what gets in the feathers. It converts that carotenoid to a different form, that's also yellow and puts that in the feathers. A cardinal is eating yellow carotenoids, and it converts it to a different carotenoid that's red. And that's what gets into the feathers. The majority of the carotenoids are yellow. There are red ones and there are others, but the majority of the birds are eating are yellow, and some convert them to a different form. So in this hermit warbler, the genes are saying around the head there, we're going to put yellow in. We're not going to put anything in the breast. We're going to put black in the wings. So it's all under genetic control, but that pigment is throughout the bird. Well, let's look at iridescence in a different way. These are sunbirds. They basically take the place of hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are only in the Americas, North, South, Central America, nowhere else in the world. These sunbirds are in Southern Africa, and they are nectar feeders and sort of take the place of hummingbirds. And they have iridescent plumage. You can see that bright iridescent throat. Now, some researchers took about 12 species of sunbirds, maybe it was a little more, but I think it was about 12, and did some experiments with the study skins. These weren't live birds. They just used the study skins. And what they did was to shine a light onto the bird, measured it so it was about the right temperature as the bird would get in its warm environment naturally, and measured then the temperature of the feathers, which are a lot hotter than the body would be. So on that yellow body, they found it to be a temperature about 63 degrees Celsius. Same light shown on the iridescent feathers was significantly warmer, 74 degrees centigrade. And that transfers to the bird itself. Now, like I say, the skin is not anywhere near that hot, but some of that heat would help transfer to the bird. So like hummingbirds, they go in and out of the shade. So in the morning, they're spending a little more time in the sun. They're gathering that warmth. As they warm up, they go into the shade. And the iridescent plumage heats better and transfers more heat more quickly to the bird. And the reverse is true. In the shade, the iridescent feathers lose heat faster than the non-iridescent feathers. So the birds are going back and forth in and out of the shade as a way to help thermoregulate. Yes, they're warm-blooded and they can maintain a constant temperature, but you would get very hot if you wore a winter coat and a 90 degrees day. So they're doing the same. They're going in and out of different temperatures to help control their body temperature. And the iridescence plays a big role in that, how quickly they warm, how quickly they lose that heat. So I have to wonder, hummingbirds are iridescent and they're tiny. They can lose heat easily. Is this a mechanism for thermoregulation in hummingbirds? I have no idea. Nobody's ever done that experiment. It's only been done with sunbirds. But I wonder if that iridescence that both male and female have can help play a role in thermoregulation. Because like the sunbirds, they're going in and out of the sun. As it gets hot, they go into the shade. In the cooler part of the day, they're out in the sun more. Interesting to speculate. I don't know if it's true, but it'd be nice to find out someday. This mallard has green head, and it's an iridescence. And if you look at it, I said there's no blue pigment in birds. There basically is also no green pigment in animals. Very, very few things have green. There is one family of birds in southern Africa. There's about 23 species of turacos. They're green by pigment. They have a pigment that's green. Some of it's green, some of it's violet, some of it's purplish, bright, but they live kind of in shaded areas. And they're the only birds to have any green pigment. No other birds have green. So this one little weird group we can just kind of ignore for now. So that green in the mallard is not pigment, it's structural. And like that parakeet, that blue is like the jay, it's a structural blue. And so it's blue based on the structure, not the pigment. What about a green parrot? I said there's no green pigments. How is the parrot green? Well, it turns out that the parrot, like that blue parakeet, has a structural blue in the feather. So those feathers would look blue structurally, but it also has a carotenoid in the feather that's yellow. And that yellow carotenoid, looking through the blue structural feather, makes it look green. So it's artificially colored as well, in a way, a sense, structural and pigment combined. Now, as I said, the mallard is iridescent. You can see that shimmer in its head. If it changes its head, it can actually get kind of purplish. There are, I said, very, very few. You almost can count on one hand the number of animals that have a blue pigment. This starfish down in tropical South Pacific, Great Barrier Reef, actually has a blue pigment. It also has, it turns out, a yellow pigment. And the intensity of the blue and the yellow cause a different intensity. There's some of the starfish are really intense blue and some are much less so. It depends on the ratio of the blue pigment with the carotenoid. But unlike that parrot, where it's structural blue and pigment yellow, here you have two pigments, blue and yellow, and it causes a different intensity in the blue. It doesn't cause the green that you saw in the parrot. Purple martins, the male here in the front is very shiny and iridescent. The female lacks that. That's his signal to attract her and to tell her his health. Older males are more iridescent than younger males. A 3-year-old bird's going to be more iridescent than a bird of the year. As subtly, it may not be that we see it well, but the birds see it quite well. And the healthier he is, the more iridescent he is. So she's attracted to the strongest, most intense iridescence that the male has. The same is true of tree swallows. Males are more iridescent than females. Now, we don't see much difference between the adults, but it's there and it's subtle and they see it. First-year females have much less so. They're almost gray in many of them. But as they become adult, they look iridescent too. Less males more so than females to other tree swallows, not necessarily to us. So they're signaling for a mate just the same way as the purple martin is. If people don't like starlings, but starlings are really fascinating birds, actually. We know a lot about bird physiology because it's studied in starlings. If you want to study the physiology of a native bird, you have to go through the permit system. Starlings, they're not native, they're not covered by the protection. You just go out and grab the starling you want and do your work. So there's been a lot of work that we know about birds based on starlings. But here's something interesting. This is a starling in the wintertime, and look at all those speckles all over. Those are the result of a lack of melanin at the tips of the feathers. So the tips of the feathers are light colored. Now, in addition to giving the black iridescent or black color in a bird, melanin gives strength to a feather. So feathers that have a lot of melanin are less subject to breakage and wear. So these white spots that you see on a winter starling get worn away. And by spring, it looks like this. It's shiny and iridescent. So the breeding plumage of a starling is old, worn plumage. After breeding, it'll molt back into that spotted plumage. So old plumage is good breeding. Now we see an iridescence here, and that helps the males attract the females. What we don't see is there's an iridescence also in the ultraviolet range. We don't see ultraviolet. Birds do. So there's an iridescence that we see. There's also one that they see, and that's important to them. Now, I wish I had video of this. For some reason, my program won't carry through the video, but look up YouTube starling murmurations. These fantastic shapes that are twisting and turning all of the time. We don't see that much here. Our starlings, yes, they're from Europe, but they don't behave the same way here they do in Europe. They're less migratory, and they don't congregate in these huge, huge flocks. People in Europe go out in the evening to see these. It's happening from late September up and through February or so, just as they're migrating. And the number of birds we're talking about is in the tens of thousands per flock. There are reports of flocks reaching Italy that are literally in the millions of starlings. And they're all doing these fantastic gyrations. It happens at dusk when the birds all congregate, and it's an amazing show to watch. So what's happening here? Any one bird, if you pick out, it has all of its neighbors around it, but it pays attention to only 7 birds. Those are out of its 7 range. It doesn't pay attention. These 7 around it are the ones it pays attention to. So if one of these birds out of its range of 7 moves, no response. But one of his 7 he's paying attention to, he responds as well. And then all of his neighbors respond, and each one in turn responds because he has 7 and the neighbor has 7 different ones, and they overlap each other. And so as one starts to turn, the next one starts to turn. The result is these waves of birds shimmering and shining all over. It's quite amazing to watch it. I urge you to go to a YouTube video and watch starling murmuration. Well, how does that help? Predators like peregrine falcons have a hard time singling out an individual bird. That wave of birds is changing so fast, and there's so many. Just when you think you've got one-sided, it moves, then how do you find one bird in there? You'd think it'd be easy with all of them. It's not. It actually is a good way of defeating predators. Now, when you've got these, you've got something else going on here. So if I flash that light, you can see it flashing. If I speed up the rate, it becomes a little more blurred. If you continue speeding it up, eventually it all becomes one big blur. So the rate of flicker for us is at about 60 cycles per second. So anything above that, 60 or above, we perceive as continuous. So if you're sitting here under fluorescent light, they're cycling at 60 cycles per second. It's just at the point where we don't see it. We see it pretty much as continuous light. Bring a bird in here and it would be flickering to a bird because the flicker rate that birds can detect is up to 120 cycles per second. So they see things happen much faster than we do. How is that important? Well, it's important in different ways. If you look at something like a Cooper's hawk, it's hunting other birds and more in the woods than out in the open necessarily. So as you're flying through the woods, all those branches are coming at you really fast. And so they're blurred. Think of it as you're driving down the road at 10 miles an hour, you can see all those trees. You drive down the road at 60 miles an hour, they become much more of a blur as they're going by you. The bird can still single those out and see them better. So those are less of a distraction and it can focus more on its prey. Well, that helps starlings too. Starlings have an iridescence, as I said, to the feather, but they also have an iridescence in the ultraviolet. We can't see it. Birds see ultraviolet. They see that ultraviolet. And that becomes important in these big murmurations. Oh, let me back up. I thought I had that. So as one bird turns, that flicker rate means they can see it turn faster, and the iridescence can catch their attention better. So that iridescence helps them so that if you've got 10,000 birds all in this flock making these waves, how do they not hit each other? Well, they can see each other turn effectively much faster than we can and react to that. As I say, we don't like starlings, but if they look like this, you might not think they were so bad. These are African starlings. They don't have the murmuration. That's just the European starling that does that. So that's important to keep unity and not hit each other, that iridescence is there. Now, red-winged blackbirds don't have iridescence. It's kind of a shiny plumage, but it's not iridescent. And let's see where I'm at here. I put something in and I'm trying to see it myself, what I did here. Okay, that's what I was hoping it was. My eyes don't work well. What I want you to look at here, red-winged blackbirds make big flocks. You'll see them out here in the winter, big flocks of them. But look at the distance between them as compared to the starlings in their murmuration. So the starlings are close together. That iridescence and that bright flash helps them. They can stay close together. It helps unity with the blackbird, but they can't be quite as close because they can't respond quite as fast. They don't see the iridescence. There's none there to see, so they can't react quite as quickly as the starlings can. So as a result, you can see big flocks flying in unison, and you can see shorebirds twisting and turning in unison. But if you look at the individual birds, they're not as close together as starlings with that iridescence. Pheasants, our male pheasant is iridescence, helps attract the attention of female, and it probably shimmers a little bit going through the grass and helps disguise him like it does that snake. But there are pheasants elsewhere in the world that certainly are iridescent. This is one found in the Himalayas. I think this one is the state bird of Nepal. And that male, female lacks it, but the male is incredibly beautiful and iridescent. We don't think of pigeons as being particularly iridescent. These mourning doves don't look iridescent. But if you look close at a mourning dove and you look at that spot on its neck, you'll see it's iridescent. And it's subtle, but it's enough for it to flash that iridescence at a female or to flash it at a male and say, hey, you're getting too close. So it's important in doves and pigeons as well. And it varies. Some rock pigeons have a little bit of iridescence. Some breeds have a lot more iridescence. The band-tailed pigeon doesn't look particularly iridescent until you look at the back of the neck. The back of the neck is quite iridescent. And look at this pigeon in Malaysia, Southern Asia. Again, the male is incredibly bright. It would be quite impressive to see those pigeons around here. Peafowl, that blue is an iridescence. So it's a structural blue, but the way the feather barbs overlap each other causes it to be shimmery and iridescent. Now, I should say, we talk about peafowl. We say peacocks. Peacock really refers just to the male. But there are other species of peafowl. This is one in Java, the green peafowl. And it fans its tail out in the same way, the one you're familiar with. But the Indian peafowl is the one we're most familiar with. Now, here is a pink peacock. Now, if anybody's told you that they have seen a pink peacock, you know they're lying. None of those are pink. There are white peacocks, leucistic individuals, and they've been bred in captivity because they're spectacular and people like them. There used to be some running around the Portland Zoo. All of these pink peacocks are photos of those leucistic peacocks that have been manipulated to look pink. There are no pink peacocks. That's all digital manipulation. But the Indian peafowl is the one we're most familiar with. And this bright iridescence helps. And then those eye spots are very iridescent, and fan those feathers out and shake them a little bit to make that iridescence sparkle a little more and really help attract the attention of the females. And again, older males show more iridescence. So it's a measure of health. It's a way to attract. Now I'm going to tell you also that this is a yellow-rumped warbler, and I want you to look, those yellow feathers, those are the upper tail coverts. On this peafowl, if you look up tail, all you're going to find is this, and that is not the tail. That is the upper tail coverts. They are long. They have overgrown the tail feathers. The tail feathers are sort of a cinnamon color. They're only about that long, and those tail coverts overgrow them, and that's what they erect and that's what they show. So you're not really looking at the tail, you're looking at the upper tail coverts. But again, flashing those, it's nice and shimmery. It attracts a lot of attention and shows a measure of your health. So iridescence has many properties. It can help show your health. It can help keep flocks together. It can confuse predators. It can be a form of camouflage. It can help with moving through a substrate, and it can help with thermoregulation. So there's a lot of things that iridescence does that we don't think about because we just think of it as visual. And with that, I'll try to answer any questions anybody has.